So I'm very happy to be here to moderate the session on global solutions to rate the WAAS platform. This session is focusing on UN's. Our session is really focused on understanding the SDGs and especially the Sustainable Development Goals of UN Agenda 2030, and especially understand where we are with regards to the achievement of the SDGs and whether the gap that we are facing in terms of achieving the SDGs is the source of the increased insecurity that we are facing worldwide. And I am extremely happy to have wonderful panelists today with me, focusing on our insecurities, but also bringing this message that there are effective ways to revive positive momentum for the completion of the SDGs in time. And our panelists are Christian Hansmeyer, Head of Research for Force for Good, Chantal Line-Carpentier, she's Head of Trade, Environment, Climate Change, and Sustainable Development at UNCTAD and member of WAAS Advisory Council. Amanda Ellis, former New Zealand Deputy Secretary for International Development, Senior Director ASU Global Future Laboratory, and also a trustee of WAAS. And then, of course, Professor Thomas Reuter at the Asian Institute at the University of Melbourne. And last but not least, Conrad Landis, Dr. Conrad Landis, postdoc researcher at the Athens University of Economics and Business, and also at the IFORIA Alliance of Excellence for Research and Innovation on Sustainability. So let's see what I have in terms of where we are with the SDGs and also how we can make sure that we can bring our current status to a positive acceleration towards achievement of the SDGs. I wanted to introduce this session with our work on innovative systems transformation, which basically brings the SDG agenda into the center of transformations and tries to make the case that it is possible to have a sustainable interaction between nature, economy, and society. And as a matter of fact, is the only way of building our future. So when we introduced the SDGs, we basically said that this is a structure that is very integrated and very holistic, and brings together the biosphere, the society, and the economy. And by bringing together these three elements of our existence, we will be able to put world development on a sustainable pathway for the current generation and the future generations. And this is our blueprint for escaping the multi-crisis that we are facing: slow economic growth, shrinking fiscal spaces, no space for serious transformative investments for the governments, increasing inequalities, difficulties with population increasing in some areas, and really been dangerously reduced in some other areas. And on top of all these socio-economic crises, the climate crisis, the biodiversity collapse. So 2015, we agreed that we want to escape from this multi-crisis that leads to geopolitical pressure by understanding our world as an interactive system between the economy, the society, and nature. And not just understanding it, but really studying this interaction and using quantitative, robust frameworks that allow the development of pathways that is dynamic optimal mixture of solutions, technological solutions, financial solutions, fiscal solutions, social solutions, to get the countries away from the current crisis towards a sustainable development path. And this is exactly what the Alliance of Excellence for Research and Innovation of IFORIA is working on since '97. Even before the SDGs, we all know that there were other similar, I would claim not as holistic, but integrated in our frameworks for the sustainable development of our planet. And within this framework, we work across many countries, more than 120 countries, to first measure where we are, and then analytically develop these pathways. Analytically means using mathematical models of the systems that are involved in the interaction between nature, society, and economy in order to reach the full implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is how we think. First, we measure in quantitative terms. We know that there are issues of some aspects of sustainable development that cannot be easily quantified, but we believe in quantification because it's an important way of communication and also an important way of having a robust basis for managing this interaction between nature, society, and economy. This is the latest Sustainable Development Solutions Network report 2025 that we launched 3 weeks ago, and it shows that only 17% of the UN Sustainable Development Goals are on track. And the colors, maybe you are becoming familiar with this report because it has been issued for quite many years now, more than a decade. We use red in order to showcase major challenges and less than 50% achievement of the goal, and this is at global scale. And we use orange to indicate achievement between 50 and 70%. And of course, significant challenges towards achieving the goal. So our performance globally is not that promising. And of course, there are very detailed indicator-based quantification per goal, per country, at different scales from global to regional to national to subnational to even institutional and corporation level. Here you see the natural systems, how they perform, the food system, the climate system, the land use system, the marine use system, the water system. And unfortunately, you see a lot of reds, but there are areas in the world that are doing a bit better than the global average, which is the European Union. You get quite a few yellows here, which is performance better than 70% of achievement of the goal. And the whole process is very detailed. The main message from this is that quantification is possible. Quantification clarifies issues. It tells you where you are. And given that you have a policy framework that identifies where you want to go, you are starting to achieve clarity with regards to what you need to do in order to reach sustainable development. Here is the downscaling to country level, and within country level, this is green. But as I told you before, we have also transposed this framework of the SDGs into corporations and companies and institution framework that again can give you a very good quantifiable information, quantified information with regards to how each unit of analysis, be it a company, be it a university, be it a ministry of a government, and so on, is performing against the SDGs. So we know where we are in terms of quantifying our performance, and we know that we are not currently doing very well. And our aim is to reduce the insecurity that is created by our not good performance with regards to achieving the SDGs. We want to reduce this insecurity by identifying ways to achieve them. How do we put our energy and effort into a structure that can actually help us improve our well-being, improve the welfare of society? This is the absolute aim, it seems to me, as a scientist. So what we say is that we know where we are through quantification, and our policy framework tells us where we want to go, our policy targets. Different regions have different policy frameworks. In Europe, we have the European Green Deal. It's a bunch of regulations and policies and laws, 150 of them since 2019, December 2019. So in less than 5 years, we have 150 new laws and regulations that actually try to transpose into a very detailed framework, the SDG framework. At the end of the day, I'm not going to go through all these regulations. I'm just going to say that at the end of the day, we know where we are, and we have also agreed and made a legal framework out of it with regards to where we want to go. So we can try to create, develop the pathways that we need to follow in order to close the gap. It's possible. As a scientist, I can tell you that it is possible. And let me give you very quickly a snapshot of an instrument that tries to do that. The SDSN Global Climate Hub that is now signing an MOU with UNFCCC. It's the analytical framework in which we develop pathways for systems transformation that will get us to climate neutrality and climate resilience. We apply this instrument in each and every country, And basically, it's not just about climate, it's about bringing the system of climate, the energy system, the transport system, the land use system, the marine use system, the health system, the innovation system, and the socioeconomic systems into interactive, analytical solutions over time and space that allow explicit guidance to what needs to be done in each system in order to reach climate neutrality and climate resilience, and while implementing all the other sustainable goals by 2050. And in order to do that, we have an interdisciplinary mathematical modeling framework, but which functions simultaneously and in total interaction with a transdisciplinary framework where the stakeholders of a society and of an economy are brought into the conversations of co-designing. So it's not just the analytical scientific solutions, it's also the views, the preferences, the fears, the vision, the aspiration of the people who need to own these dynamic pathways, because these are the people who are going to implement them after they are designed. And the whole thing is saved in an open access platform that brings together all the data, all the models, and also makes available through open access and freely provided training tools like digital twins and visualization dashboards and decision support systems that allow stakeholders to engage in understanding the pathways. In closing this introduction with one solution that I hope feels promising, let me just say that we introduce the two reports, the European level report of climate neutrality pathways in Europe at the UN Seville conference, and then we have one for each and every country in Europe. And why Seville conference? Because it does not only tell you what to do, but also identifies the way to finance the pathways, which is crucial. So our solutions basically give you the simulated changes that need to happen in your country in order to bring all these systems into a state of dynamic interaction that will achieve climate neutrality. I will finish with very quick results, just saying that in 2050, energy consumption, if we implement the climate law and the relevant energy laws of Europe, energy consumption will drop by 25%, energy supply will increase by 30%, the energy mix will transform away from fossil fuels, and also not only we can articulate what happens in each and every country, what should happen in each and every country with regards to energy production and energy use, but also integrate all other systems here. So when we're talking about energy, we are also including agriculture, forestry, transport, and so on, all the other systems. And we also identify the optimal energy corridors, how we import energy if we don't produce enough, what is the optimal amount of export if we produce more. And we have the results for each and every other system, the food and land use system, where we predict major land use changes, and also the ways to finance all of this through fiscal financing, but also private financing. And I will just finish with this tool that is a catalog of sources and instruments that is easy to navigate and includes 57 sources, 78 instruments, and 169 best practices for finances these climate neutrality and climate resilience pathways. So I will stop here and just say that there is hope. There is a lot of hope from science, but also a lot of hope from transdisciplinary effort to engage the stakeholders. Let's see if the other speakers are also in that mode of being hopeful. Our next speaker is Chris from Force for Good. They have been doing amazing, extensive work on how to close the financing gap for the SDGs, what are the right investments, what are the areas that could help us accelerate the transition to sustainability. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Phoebe. And I just want to start, first of all, by saying thank you to the WAAS organizers for hosting this important event and for inviting me to participate. Very much looking forward to this discussion. Phoebe asked a very interesting question at the beginning, which was whether the lack of progress on the SDGs was contributing to the current multi-crisis. And I think, unfortunately, the answer to that question is very much yes. But I think it's worse than that because the polycrisis is exacerbating the lack of progress on the SDGs as well. So there is very much a vicious circle that's happening in the world. And I'm sorry, I'll just share my screen here briefly for a couple of slides. I think the world up until about 2020 was making real, if slow, progress on a number of SDGs, not in all places, not at consistent speeds, but there was real progress being made on some of the structural SDGs, particularly relating to hunger and poverty. And that progress has very much, in most parts of the world, been thrown out the window due to the pandemic and then the subsequent economic crisis, the subsequent energy crisis, the security crisis, the political crisis that we're living through right now. And this is actually the last year's version of the dashboard that Phoebe put up. The picture last year was very much the same as this year. Phoebe also mentioned one of the statistics that 17% of the underlying targets are on track. The corollary of that 17% is that 50% of the underlying targets are moderately to severely off track, and that 30% of targets are actually regressing. So the world is actually losing some of the progress that we have made in the first couple of decades, in the first years of the SDGs, and we're now heading to a world where no country in the world is currently on track to meet the SDGs by their 2030 deadline. The European Union countries are far ahead in terms of sustainable development, but their progress is achingly slow in most cases. So they will not, at current rates, hit the SDGs until later this century. And while Asian countries, and particularly South and Southeast Asian countries, are developing much more quickly, the gap that they need to close to is so large that they also won't be able to meet the SDGs before the middle of the century. That issue is exacerbated in places like sub-Saharan Africa and small island developing states, where at current rates of progress, the SDGs won't be hit this century. So it's very clear that the world is going to need to adopt very different approaches to the ones that they've been adopting in the past in order to meet the goals. And one of the biggest challenges that the world faces, of course, is one of financing. So there have been several attempts periodically to try to calculate what the annual SDG financing gap is, usually looking at a subset of goals or at a subset of countries. And the figures that often come up are sort of in the $3 to $4 trillion annual funding gap range. What we have found in our research, though, is that if we fully factor in the cost of funding net zero and climate change, including the investments that are needed in the developed world, that we add several $trillion to that cost. And if we actually factor in the economic cost in terms of creating economic prosperity as part of the SDGs, so creating real financial inclusion and creating an asset base and capital formation in the developing world, again, adds trillions of dollars. And that together with the impact of underfunding, the rolled over cost from past years and inflation means that the actual funding gap is closer to $15 trillion rather than 5. Now, the good news is that there is more than enough capital in the world to fund this. There's approximately $650 trillion of assets in the world. The challenge is, though, that these assets are allocated for certain uses, right? They belong to households and governments, and they represent people's mortgages, and they represent healthcare payments and social programs and retirement income. And these assets are invested with fiduciaries at certain rates of return that they need in order to meet their objectives. So they're not necessarily available to fund sustainable development. So the challenge for the goals is that this capital doesn't fund or flow to development needs, it does flow to development solutions. So the only way that the SDGs are going to get solved is if we can identify a series of high impact, commercially feasible, technologically mature, and scalable solutions that can be deployed globally that will have a material impact on the SDGs and start catalyzing further progress. Our research has identified 9 such solution sets. They span, some of them are policy related, some of them are financial related, some of them are technology related. And I'm not going to go into each one of the 9 now, but they include things like universal telecom broadband connectivity powered with AI, or accelerating the energy transition and the move to net zero, or digital mass financial inclusion. So using digital technologies to properly financially include all individuals. And what we have found is that if these solutions can be scaled and deployed globally, the impact on the SDGs would be absolutely transformative. The 2 most impactful ones, so the energy transition and universal connectivity with AI, could approximately solve for 25% of the goal's underlying targets if fully implemented. But even the other ones will solve anywhere between 10 to 7%. And what we have found is that if you could scale and deploy all of these, even allowing for the overlap between some of these solutions, that we could achieve approximately 90% of the SDGs by implementing these 10 solutions globally. Now, we say just, but just is obviously a tricky word here, because implementing just one of these solutions, let alone 9 or 10, is a huge task, and it's a multi-stakeholder effort. So it requires solution owners to contribute IP and technology. It requires capital, both private and public. It requires governments for capacity building and for policy frameworks that are conducive for the deployment of solutions. And it requires civil society as an implementation partner for scaling. So, although it's a tall order, I think these solutions are the best bet that the world has to reigniting the sustainable development agenda that we need to break out of the policy crisis. And because we have identified sufficient number of solutions, and there are probably many, many more, and there's growing awareness around them, I am cautiously optimistic or hopeful, as Phoebe said, around our ability to meet the SDGs. It's not going to happen by 2030, but we can certainly make up for much of the lost time. I'll leave it at that and hand it back to Phoebe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And in order to implement those solutions, I would add that we need, first of all, awareness of the transformation that is needed, and then very explicit and detailed recommendations on the actual transformation. It's such a difficult job to be done. It's not easy. It's data hectic, science hectic, and importantly, in order to truly engage the stakeholders, you really need to invest seriously in upskilling and reskilling them. Seriously invest, work with them continuously for a couple of years. It's something that we're doing on the ground, and it's indeed very intense and not easy. No big transformation has happened easily. This one will not happen in an easy way, but we need to try, and we need to be consistent and persistent. Thank you, Chris. Very interesting result. And I'm going to move forward to Dr. Carpentier. She's head of Trade, Environment, Climate Change, and Sustainable Development branch of the UN Conference of Trade and Development, which is a division of international trade and commodities. And I am very happy to have her here because she's so knowledgeable with so rich experience that she can really give us a very enlightening information. So, Chantal, what policies do you think are needed to advance foreign direct investment and finance climate action, finance SDGs? What do we need to restructure in the global financial architecture to get the funding that is needed?
Well, thank you, Phoebe, and thank you for the introduction you provided and for Chris' presentation, which will make my job much easier. I will answer your question, and I'll take an angle from trade. You will not be surprised given where I work, but also answer your question in terms of the finance. So just to complete what Chris was saying and what you were saying, more than 30 developing countries did not have a single utility-size international investment project in renewable, including 11 NDCs up to this year. So that means there are 30 countries completely left behind in their energy transition. And this is at the same time that 685 million people still lack access to electricity. So for them, it's still a luxury. And so it shows a gap, but an urgent need to climate-aligned investment, but also an opportunity. And basically, just a few more stats, because I think they are important. You mentioned the data being important. We basically, investment in developing countries actually dropped from a quarter to a third across infrastructure, renewable energy, water and sanitation, and agri-food. So the areas that are the most important for the transition, water and sanitation, renewable energy, agri-food system. The first two by 30%, agri-food system by 19%. And basically only the health sector saw growth in 2024, and this from a very small base. And this is in the context of a lot of trade uncertainty that we expect will be reducing trade flows, and that means also investment flows by up to 10%, given the current trade geopolitics. And this is happening at the same time that unprecedented cut in international aid is going on. So basically, 2% reduction last year and up to a decline of 17 to 20% this year is expected in development aid for those countries. So you've been talking, Chris, about the help that these countries need, and actually we're decreasing the help that is going to them, the capacity building, these technologies that need to be affordable to them. It's increasingly not possible. And this is also at a time when 3.4 billion people live in these countries where their governments spend more on servicing their debt than on health or education. And so basically, and most of the aid that they're actually getting is on loan, adding to their debt distress. So there's really a need to address these issues. And as I said, I'll take the trade angle, because as aid is decreasing, trade is actually one of the largest source of revenue for these countries. And both of you have mentioned very well that these countries actually need to have sustainable trade and low carbon economic diversification to support the policies that you mentioned in the transition. They need to have access to these markets. And the key sectors, including renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, blue economy, forestry, ecotourism, circular bioeconomy, hold enormous potential for these countries. And not only for climate mitigation and resilience, but also for driving inclusive economic growth and creating jobs. So this is something that is a win-win, and we need to work on these issues. We also did a study that looked at the whole supply chain for renewable energy, including, in this case, solar and wind, amongst developing countries. And so from a trade perspective, what is it that developing countries can do? Well, one is to look at their average tariff. So in Asia and Oceania, the average tariff on wind and solar is 2.5%. In Africa, it's 7.1%. And then you add to that non-tariff border measures, and you add an additional 0.4 to 0.7%. So developing countries through South-South trade and cooperation have an opportunity to actually move up the supply chain in terms of producing their own grown renewable energy, but that needs to be looking at their trade policies, while managing, of course, trade-off between the tariff revenues, import costs, and industry protection. Then in the ocean economy, there's huge opportunities, and we just started working on the launch of the UN Global Seaweed Initiative, which stands a lot of opportunity for developing countries. I'm not going to go in that right now, but that's another area where there's a lot of potential. And to realize these potential requires targeted support, and both of you have already mentioned that. They need access to affordable green technologies, resilient infrastructure, and capacity to develop current regulatory investment framework. And that means capacitated civil servant that can actually put in place these very complex policies that are needed to manage the co-benefits and the trade-off amongst the SDGs. And of course, these frameworks need to be inclusive and leave no one behind, such as women, indigenous people, small, medium enterprises, and others. So to capture this opportunity, what we offer at UNCTAD is basically a guide for policymakers to leverage trade in their NDCs by building and providing support to developing countries along their whole supply chain, and to leverage the transition for their own NDCs. But also for additional diversification and market access that can give them the revenue to invest more in their SDGs these tough times. The right policies and partnership to do this are very important, as you both mentioned, so I'm not going to go into detail, except that there's quite a bit that could be done in terms of tariffs and non-tariffs. In terms of SDG, to increase the flow of capital and the flow of investment in these SDGs, taking SDG 7, for example, we need to ensure that policy design enable the deployment of renewable infrastructure and does not exacerbate inequalities. And instead, it needs to bring affordable, sustainable energy to underserved population. And that adds another layer of the complexity to what, Chris, you were mentioning. So some ways to get to it. So leverage the potential for renewable energy sources as a key factor to attract FDI. This can be done to a new free economic zone, which we're working on with the BIGFIT, the Baku Initiative on Climate Finance Investment for Trade. And then use the revenue to basically invest in more bankable projects. Technical support for sustainable finance to close the climate investment gap is absolutely needed. And knowledge sharing and green policies, partly through South-South cooperation, are needed. Clean technology innovation access must be enhanced. We need to stop talking about transfer of technology on mutually agreed term, which is in every UN document, and instead talk about which technology appears in these NDCs and who owns these technologies, and bring the stakeholder to the table and basically broker a deal so that actually it's a win-win, that those that have the technologies have access to new market, but those developing countries that need these technologies actually can afford them. And then you mentioned in terms of the finance side, we need to reduce the cost of capital for these countries. That can be up to 2 or 3 times higher for Africa, for instances. How can this be done? Better use of national development banks, recapitalization of our multilateral development banks so they can actually offer some very targeted guarantees and basically investment in the infrastructure that is needed to crowd in the private sector. And on the trade side, reduce the trade barriers and align incentive and trade policies with the NDCs, as I mentioned. And then basically keep these markets open for developing countries that they're facing very large headwinds right now. And for that, global cooperation, investment, and co-creation are needed. You can't just transfer a technology or a policy, as you mentioned, Phoebe. We need to work together to do that. And to ensure that these countries can transition to low carbon economies, because basically if they don't, none of us is actually meeting our Paris Agreement. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting, and it brings together so many angles. Would you agree that, yes, we need to restructure the global financial architecture? We need also, I think, this is me talking, not you, to revising how we rate the ability of countries to borrow. We need to bring into the NDCs also some additional sometimes knowledge, because sometimes they don't have the optimal mixture of solutions there. But like Chris said, and like you hinged upon, there are every year, this is me saying that, but Chris referred to the total amount of the savings that are sitting there and are looking for interesting investments. Every year we have something around 30 trillion in savings. Sitting there, trying to find interesting investments. And of course, many of these investments are in the global south, are in the emerging economies, the developing world. However, this risk of these countries is basically translated into this non-institutional robustness. Institutions sometimes are weak. How do we go in and help the creation of robust institutions so that we make sure that whatever money we achieve to fuel down these countries are really used in the best possible way? And this is not only an issue of the developing world, it's also relevant for the developed world and even the in Europe. So my main worry with my work in the multilateral world is that even though we achieve restructuring of the global financial architecture, we need to be very aware of the fact that institutions in the local solutions, the institutions that will implement, the local institutions that will be called in to implement, need to be very robust.
Could I just quickly, maybe just give one example, Phoebe. I come from Quebec, and Quebec basically has workers' funds. And these workers' funds are basically not managed by the investment companies. They're managed by 80% of it is managed by the workers' fund itself. And its mandate is to create jobs, because you're workers. You want your saving to be invested in creating decent job where you work, but increasingly also in developing countries. And also with an environmental and social mandate in these. And yet that's not a model that is taken across the world. It's the opposite. 80% of the money of the labor's savings is invested by big investment firms that don't have a mandate to actually deliver more decent job for the workers. So maybe that's just one of them, but I'm sure the other speakers might have other examples as well.
Yes. A very telling example. Thank you very much. Let me move to our next speakers. The next one is Professor Amanda Ellis. She's she's a very experienced person in the multilateral world, UN ambassador, executive director of Asian Pacific Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation, and many long CV that brings together the scientific knowledge and also the actual experience with the people. Amanda every day has a meeting with the actual stakeholders and mobilize the thing. It's amazing what she does. So Amanda, how can deeper engagement with the sustainable development goals from businesses, the civil society, the local governments can promote greater human security?
Thank you so much, Phoebe. Such a pleasure to be here with you and all the other brilliant panelists, and thank you to WAAS. Ban Ki-moon, when he announced the Sustainable Development Goals, called them a to-do list for people and planet. And I think your point is spot on. We are having a crisis of nation states right now, and we need to be looking to civil society, to business, and to local government to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the social contract between the world leaders and the people was another dimension, a very explicit dimension of the Sustainable Development Goals, which at the time were absolutely historic. This was the first time all 193 UN member countries came together with an agreed global agenda, and it was very exciting at the time to be part of those negotiations. The SDGs were also historic because SDG 5, gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, was embedded throughout. Now, this was not without battles. And when we look now at the fact that women have only 64% of the global economic rights of our male counterparts, we realize we still have a long way to go. And negotiations on that were by no means simple. SDGs, I am going to argue controversially, are on the way out. And we need a new global system. Just as we transferred from the Millennium Development Goals to the SDGs as a more comprehensive framework, and for the first time, the SDGs actually included climate, which was critical, included governance, and with SDG 16. So what is it that needs to transition now, and how can we do that? We need to remember that the US officially denounced and rejected the Sustainable Development Goals at the United Nations earlier this year and called out those issues of climate and gender, which for me are really pivotal issues, as being irrelevant to the current US policy framework. So how is it that we can improve human security through attention to the SDGs, and I would add the SDGs and beyond? Now, Chris did a great job of talking about business as a force for good, and I want to give just one example. We run the We Empower Women Entrepreneurs United Nations Development Goal Challenge, which is a competition in all 193 countries to crowdsource entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs, for the reasons I've stated, to crowdsource these incredible innovators who are actually using their business endeavors to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and create all sorts of fascinating new potential that I hope will be in the next iteration. So for those of you at New York Climate Week, let me know, and I will invite you to a wonderful pitch night that Deanne von Furstenberg hosts. Second, of course, we have the UN Global Compact, and we know that countries are encouraged to integrate the SDGs into their core business. So business is really critical. As far as civil society goes, it's been fascinating for me to be on the board of the Blue Planet Alliance, which is the brainchild of Henk Rogers, the Tetris guru. And Henk, when he had a major life event, recognized that he needed to get on and implement his mission, which is ending the use of fossil-based fuels. So he managed to get Hawaii to commit at the state legislature level to 100% renewable energy by 2045. And we've all talked about incentives, which have been such a useful part of this conversation, aligning incentives with the outcomes we want. And since then, Hawaii has gone from 5% renewable energy to 40% in the last 10 years, now saving $2 billion a year on oil and gas imports and moving to a cleaner, greener economy. And Chantal made those points very well. We can actually align the development agenda, the sustainable development agenda, and finance with the Sustainable Development Goals in a way that benefits everybody. And Phoebe, the incredible detailed work that you have been doing at country level is, I think, just fantastic blueprints. So what's happened since that example in Hawaii? Well, over half of Americans are now covered by a similar mandate at the state level. And even though the United States has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, states are still in. Not all, but more than 50% of American citizens. So that, I think, is a very positive thing and shows us that we need to be looking at this sub-national governance. Another wonderful example here, actually, let me go with the Student Volunteer Army in New Zealand. So this is a group of university students who wanted to become involved with the Sustainable Development Goals, created an app and a platform so that students could go out into the community, map their support through the Sustainable Development Goals, and then they provide that data to the national government every year so that it can be included in New Zealand's annual report on progress to the Sustainable Development Goals. So just an example there from business, from civil society, and from state government on how we can harness the power of the people to really move forward in a time where arguably the polycrisis is seeing nation-state commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals wane. Thank you all so much. Such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I agree with most of what you said. I am worried because you said want to change the SDGs, but we can discuss this.
Build on them. I think we need regenerative development goals. One little example is that when you look at the current sub-targets for SDG 5, it simply says women should have property rights in line with national laws. And I can tell you from having architected the Women, Business and the Law project at the World Bank, which has now gone to amazing new heights under Tia Trumbich and her team, that there are many, many countries that do not allow women property rights, which prevents them from collateral for a business loan. So that some of the elements that are embedded in the SDGs need to be upgraded. So I'm not saying throw them out. I'm saying let's do an upgrade.
An upgrade with adding information and indicators. I agree, culture is not there, but please, let's not change everything again because, as you know very well, it's so difficult to translate on this into frameworks that work towards recommendations. And now slowly governments are getting the message. So enriching, yes, but not putting some other framework that is similar but different in place.
Absolutely, an upgrade. Just as we went from MDGs to Sustainable Development Goals, and it was an upgrade. Thank you for that language. I will use that from now on. We need the next upgrade. next software update.
Our next speaker, Thomas Reuter, is a professor at the Asia Institute of the University of Melbourne. He's a trustee at the academy. He's a friend, a person that contributed hugely, not just to the academy, but around the world. He taught on sustainability. He actually had projects on the ground. He's focused on the anthropological aspects, and I really want to ask, how can we see this transition to cover a global sustainability being achieved, while not forgetting about embracing diversity and empowering the local actors? I think what you will say will be a lovely continuation of what Amanda has also introduced. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Phoebe. And like you said, I do have a bit of an angle on the situation on the ground, having spent literally years, many years, doing local research. As an anthropologist, I understand the perspective of local and indigenous people. And I'd just like to, first of all, say to you that local people includes everyone on this panel in your daily life, everyone in the audience. We are all local people. At the same time, we are also people who have a very globalist perspective from the UN, from other major institutions, myself included. I've been a former executive on the International Science Council. I've been heading the World Anthropology Union for years. And yeah, I understand that perspective perfectly well also. But there's a gap between the two, a massive gap. And it's the kind of gap that, you know, the Frankfurt School of Social Theory described as the gap between the system and the life world. You know, the sort of organized, structured systems that we have and the actual world. Or to quote Gregory Bates, and it's the difference between the map and the territory. And improving the map will never turn it into the territory. It's not possible. It's just a map. The reality of transitions to sustainability is what happens on the ground, not in our models, in our policies. These are just models. Now, so what's happening on the ground? Because the problem is, I think the reason why the SDGs are not being implemented is because local actors do not even know about them or don't care about them in much of the world. And that's kind of sobering if you come from the global perspective, to realize that actually it's not that important. What we think is so important is not very important to a lot of people. In reality, how people may transition to living a life that is sustainable is very much dependent on local factors such as culture, local politics, history, economics, social structures, gender was mentioned before, monetary resources, and the local human ecology. To have a sustainable relationship to the ecosystem in which you live isn't one way. It isn't the same for someone who lives in the Sahara and someone who lives in the Amazon. It's not the same. I'll just to give an extreme example, but every local ecology is unique. And this diversity is actually the way of nature. Diversity is the way of nature to survive. We all know that. But we forget. Global systems have real trouble dealing with diversity. I think the way to do this is to turn things upside down, really, and to empower local actors instead of having a model and expecting conformity to that. So let me just explain that a little. It's a bit like a mouse lifting an elephant. It would be wiser to, in fact, try and get the elephant to do the heavy lifting. And by that, I mean the fact that there are, 7 billion people out there whose actions individually may not count for much, but together are massively powerful. And we need that power. We don't need a few thousand people in Geneva or in New York. We need billions of people actually working on this. So how do we empower these local actors? I think the key is that we realize local actors as a source of knowledge, a source of solutions, and that we empower them to actually share those solutions, to create, to have peer-to-peer interaction on facing the challenges locally. Sorry. To give you an idea of where the UN is now, Germany is a small country, but it has some 11,000 municipalities, 3.5 million businesses, and registered businesses, and 15,000 community organizations. The UN managed so far 344 voluntary local reports. Okay, that's actually local communities, municipalities reporting on their progress. Okay, this is the attempt to push control down to the lowest level. It's not working. Actually, it's only 257 participating municipalities. In 2024, there were only 33 such reports. Out of these millions and millions of local governments, not to mention businesses and community organizations. So we are far removed from controlling the local level, and I don't think we should try. Really, it's counterproductive. If you look at attempts to localize the policy, to change policy to include localization, what do we see? Monitoring, reporting, service delivery, more reporting. If you go down this list, sorry, you see very little there that actually is about local actors and empowering them. For example, the closest thing is policy brief 10. It has to do with a forum of mayors. Yeah, it's actually a small group of mayors. We also have local government organizations like ICLE, which are huge, but the UN doesn't go there. It tries to recreate something that is in its control rather than collaborate with the kind of networking that local actors are already doing, a peer-to-peer networking. So this is this forum of mayors that the UN Economic Council of Europe has thought of. And yeah, one wonders why there is this resistance to empowering local actors, or this fear of letting go of control and giving other people responsibility. Probably the best initiative that I can see in coming out of the policy circle is the UNDP's SIP programs for social innovation. These are actually platforms to encourage peer-to-peer exchange. There are some in Thailand, Indonesia, and Pakistan, but even there, I don't think they're sophisticated enough, and the reach and scale is too small. And there's still too much top-down control. I would suggest that we need a solution that is global. We need an information system whereby local actors are empowered through peer exchange of solutions, because it's not just 7 billion pairs of hands, it's also 7 billion brains that we want to tap into. And we need them because the solutions aren't just, there isn't one solution for energy, one solution for food systems, which is what I work on. There are millions of different solutions, one for every local situation. And for that, you need 7 billion brains. And you need those people to be empowered. It's not going to happen in Geneva. I mean, even if we look just as us in our capacity as local people, how many of us drive an EV? How many of us produce their own electricity on their rooftop? How many of us have sustainable water use? How many kilometers have you flown, over the last year? I mean, we're not doing it. Okay. So, and if we're not doing it and people aren't doing it around the globe, where is it supposed to happen? In Geneva? No. It's really, we have to change our lives. People have to change their lives everywhere. And they're only going to do it if they are encouraged and empowered to do it their own way. And the knowledge system that I'm proposing here would do that. And I think digital solutions are the best way to connect people and help them share solutions that make sense to them. This is the information flow in such a system, how I would imagine it could be done. And that is basically practice-based models of sustainability action, whereby individuals contribute and they can also tap in to a huge pool of information on provided by their peers on how to address issues like water or energy locally in a huge diversity of different situations. Okay. Anyway, that's all for me. I've written about this if you're interested. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I fully agree with you on structured ways of bringing together the stakeholders. In the SDSN, we have hubs of stakeholders in almost each and every country of the world, and then try to localize all of them. And the wealth of knowledge that is there, and the ways to use all this knowledge for co-designing the transformations that are needed really creates huge optimism and huge potential for this transformation. So your work is very, very relevant to what we do in Euphoria in all these countries, and I think it's getting momentum nowadays, and it's a very, very good sign. So in this session, I will ask Conrad Landis, my good colleague and friend, to present in another session tomorrow, taking my time so that we don't rush him into presenting what he does. It's a quantitative presentation, and I think it deserves its time, because it's a way to quantify human security, the different aspects of human security. So I will close this session thanking each and every one of you, bringing together the solutions potential, the very complicated structure of this optimal mixture of solutions that are needed for the transition to sustainability, and also the effort that needs to be allocated towards attracting fiscal spaces, that is taxpayers' money, but also private money that are there, they exist, and they are looking for it as an investment in the most, I would say, socially profitable, but also profitable in the basic way of measuring profit to everybody around the world. So how do you engage the global population into these transformations that are going to support their welfare that are going to get each and every kid in school, that are going to give electricity and connectivity and AI applications to everybody, that are going to bring equality, and that they are going to also achieve productivity and increased growth. This is what we want to do. Basically, we know how to do it, but it's so difficult, and it needs to engage each and every one. Like Thomas said, we need the brains of each and every one in order to achieve this transformation on time. So I need to be hopeful that we are going to make it. Thank you very much for your patience in this slightly overrun session. I hope you got some messages that you think useful here. Thank you.